Japan's government has made a historical decision. This decision takes the government away from 70 years of pacifism after World War II. If your grandfather or great-grandfather would hear this decision, they would turn themselves around in grave, searching panically for their flamethrower. Japan rearming. Where's my flamethrower? Japan's government has accepted the policy change that will give them the possibility to acquire offensive weaponry. We're talking about missiles, the capability to strike targets on enemy soil in North Korea, in China, and in Russia. What a historic moment. Japan for the last 7 decades and right now has relied very heavily on United States security guarantees. United States at the moment has 50,000+ soldiers on the ground in Japan. Can Japan rely on these troops in the future for the defense of their nation? This is why they make this policy change right now. But why now? Why not before? Japan is surrounded by neighbors, how to describe them? Aggressive neighbors. Tensions with China were at an all-time high when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, and since then Japan has been looking into increasing their defensive capabilities. Many Japanese people feel that this change in policy will go directly against Japanese post-war constitution, which renounces the right and means to wage war on any other nation. This is why Japanese officials, when coming out with this policy change, they stress the expression, the ability to strike back. United States has tried to persuade Japanese government for decades to not rely so heavily on US defense guarantees and assume more responsibility in their own defense. The United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had this to say about the Japanese policy change. A bold and historic step to strengthen and defend the free and open Indo-Pacific. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin accused Tokyo, and I quote, hyping up the China threat to find an excuse for a military buildup. The policy change calls for boosting the Japanese defense spending to roughly 2% of GDP. Right now, it is on 1% of GDP. We are talking about 100% increase in military spending for Japan in the next 5 years. Whew, oh my god. Is anybody else getting hot and bothered here? Whew, Japan, you're flattering me. A huge sum of this money will be spent on acquiring missiles from the United States of America, like Tomahawk missiles, capable of reaching North Korea and China and Russia if necessary. Kuril Islands, territorial disputes. Japan also plans to develop its own weapons with this money, including advanced fighter jets, hypersonic missiles, and drones. This is the biggest shift in Japan's defensive policy since the ending of the World War II. Japan's ruling party has long awaited to make this policy change. They've always wanted to change the constitution to remove these restrictions from the armed forces of Japan, but they never had enough political support. But the situation is different now with the Chinese threat. The Japanese government insists that Japan's defensive policies will remain strictly defensive, and the country will neither threaten other nations or carry out preemptive strikes. But I gotta say, that is a lot of money to be put on defensive capabilities. When this policy change has been in effect for 5 years and Japan's military spending is 2% of the GDP, they will be in the list of top 5 countries with the largest military expenditure in the entire world. Former defense official of Japan, Yoye Yanagisawa, has this to say about it. To have a deterrent, we must also have the ability to completely neutralize the enemy's missiles. We don't have that. The legal workings behind this policy change are shady. Japanese constitution states that its military is meant for only defensive purposes, but when does a military that has so much defensive capabilities suddenly become a military that has offensive capabilities? Some weapons can be used both ways. The lines are very blurry on this. This Tomahawk missile? You can only defend with this missile. This modern fighter jet? It's only for defense. Don't worry, my Chinese friend. This unmanned attack drone? It's only a defensive attack drone. Don't worry about it. This ICBM ready for launch with Chinese coordinates on it? Don't worry, it's only for defensive purposes and for beauty. The lines are blurry. China is worried. Japanese constitutional law expert Yasuo Hasebe has this to say about the legal workings behind this. We only know whether the attack is preemptive or not, or legal or not, after it has been carried out. This is an expert on constitutional law, and this is what he says. He's basically saying that you gotta attack first and then think if it was legal or not. There is no way of knowing before. since a preemptive attack could be seen as a defensive attack. I know your grandfather or great-grandfather is turning for the second time in the grave already after all this talk, searching for his flamethrower. What does this mean for Washington? Japan is about to buy a lot more military tech from the United States of America, military tech and missiles that USA already deploys in Japan. One could almost say double or nothing. There are Tomahawk missiles right now in Japan, but Japan wants to buy them for their own. Zach Cooper from the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. says this: one reason for this overlap in weaponry is the concern about the return of the former president Donald Trump, who downplayed the value of America's traditional allies. Basically wants to say that if Trump or someone like him sharing his views would come to the power in the US, they might be thinking about pulling troops away from Japan, and then Japan would have nothing in defense. How is this Japanese defense policy change connected to the Ukrainian war? Toshimichi Nagaiwa, a Japanese Air Force general, has this to say: Ukrainian war has shown us the necessity of being able to sustain a fight, and that is something that Japan has not so far been prepared for. It is like Japan is making a late start. It is like we are 200 meters behind on a 400-meter sprint. But Japan is the third largest economy in the world. If they make such a sudden change in policy, I think they can catch up with 200 extra meters very fast. China's defense spending overtook Japan's at the turn of the century, and now has military budget more than 4 times as Japan's. Japanese military officials have stated that the worst problems Japanese military has right now are too few munitions, lack of spare parts, and lack of equipment. Japan is the third largest economy in the world, but its military has been so much behind. But after this policy change, their military spending would be the third largest in the world. I will now read you a list of military tech Japan intends to buy with this new money allocated to the military budget. Ballistic missile defense, attack and reconnaissance drones, satellite communications equipment, Lockheed Martin F-35 stealth fighters, helicopters, submarines, warships, and heavy lift transport jets. Where do the Japanese get the money for this? To pay for all of this, the ruling party in Japan said that they would raise tobacco and corporate and disaster reconstruction income taxes. They will raise taxes. Japan is not the only country in the Western Allied group to make such a drastic turn in their defense spending. We have Germany, quite far from Russia, quite safe from any invasion, but a few months ago Olaf Scholz stated that Germany will be pumping 100 billion euros into its defense budget, and some German officials say that this number is definitely not enough to make Germany's military a regional powerhouse, but it will only be enough to bring it out of the chaos and destruction it's facing now due to lack of equipment, lack of maintenance on vehicles and helicopters and planes. Another country who is doing such a U-turn with their defense spending is Poland. Poland is acquiring weapons from the United States and from South Korea. They're building up their own defensive industry. With almost every weapon system they buy, they have this term that it needs to be put together on Polish soil. If it's not going to be Germany, then the regional powerhouse in military will be Poland. And all of these 3 countries right now have made these U-turns in their defense budget after the war in Ukraine started. This is not a coincidence. This is a reaction to Russia's aggressive foreign policy. Poland and Japan are neighbors to Russia. I mean, technically Poland is neighbor to Belarus, but Belarus is the closest ally to Russia, so you could say these 2 nations have direct borders with Russia or Russian allies. And seeing how Russia behaves with their neighbors, the war in Ukraine, it is only natural that Poland and Japan both feel like they need to step up their defense game. These are the Kuril Islands. Currently, Russia occupies them, but Japan claims them as their own. I mean, I'm not saying anything, but with these new F-35s and these new Tomahawk missiles and these new submarines, maybe the Kuril Islands will be Japanese again. I know, your grandfather just turned for the 3rd time in the grave, looking for his flamethrower. Making these videos is new for me. Usually I make Ukrainian updates, but these videos need a researcher who put this information together, and they need an editor. So actually you could say these new kind of documentary videos have a team behind them. So if you like these videos, please support these videos. Best way to do it is to subscribe to the channel right now and to become a Patreon. Link is in the description below, so we can make these new videos eye candy for you. They even have animations. What? Thank you, my friends, for watching. I appreciate you. Until my next video, Slava Ukraini.